everyone. Today I am filming my twin birth story. The story is so special to me. It was my first birth experience and only one so far, and I had a lot of complications. I would say a pretty unique birth story. If you're interested in seeing my journey with preeclampsia and having SIUGR and having other complications and a C-section, then keep on watching. To give a little backstory quickly, to explain why some things happened the way they did in my birth. I gave birth at 32 weeks and 5 days, so just 2 days short of 33 weeks. I had a plan to have a C-section at 34 weeks because my baby B had stopped growing. He had SIUGR, which is selective intrauterine growth restriction. So he basically had completely fallen under the 10th percentile. I don't even think he was on the charts when he was born. So yes, that was caught like a week before I delivered, and that was originally, so I was originally going to be induced at 34 weeks because of that. And the weeks leading up to my birth, I had started to have a lot of swelling, and my blood pressures were normal, but they were on the higher end of normal. So I had been taking my blood pressure at home just to be safe. And then we discovered that my baby B had a interventricular hemorrhage, so he had a bleed in his brain. So that was another reason they wanted to deliver him earlier, because they could actually do an MRI once he was born. They couldn't get a great look at it just from ultrasounds, and they wanted to make sure he was going to be okay and the extent of it and everything. So that was kind of scary, but spoiler alert, he's okay as of right now. Those are like the 3 reasons I was going to be induced at 34 weeks. So it was the SIUGR, the interventricular hemorrhage, and my like slow preeclampsia that was happening. Okay, so once my blood pressure started to get a little high, my doctor had me get a monitor at home and to check my blood pressure twice a day. So I had been doing that, and they just slowly kind of got higher and higher, but they weren't in a danger zone yet. And I just was really swollen. And also, I think I need to mention, I have monodi twins, so they are almost always delivered before 36 weeks due to the fact that they share a placenta. So it was on a Sunday afternoon, and just kidding, it was on a Sunday morning, and I had just gotten up and I was just feeling really swollen, and I woke up with this pounding headache, and I kind of had a feeling that something was up. So I went downstairs and I took my blood pressure, and it was way higher than it should have been. It was way higher than I had ever been before. I think it was, I want to say 162 over like 127, and that is not good. So I waited about a half hour, took it again, it was still high, and so I texted my doctor because he's a family friend, and I said, hey, this is what my blood pressure has been over the last hour, what do you think I should do? And originally I was going, if I made it to between 34 and 36 weeks, I was going to deliver a hospital that's close to me with my OBGYN, who I know super well, have known him my whole life. But that hospital does not have a high level NICU, so I had to wait until I was past like 35 weeks-ish if I wanted to deliver there. And my doctor said that I needed to go to the large hospital that was like 25 minutes away, with the higher level NICU, just in case I had to deliver because of preeclampsia. So, but he said just like wait a little bit longer, take another blood pressure in like 30 minutes, see what it's looking like. If it's staying high or if it's getting worse, you know, like, or if it's staying the same because it already was pretty bad, then to go in. So eventually I took it again. It was still pretty high, and me and my husband drove to the hospital. And I already had my hospital bag packed. I actually packed it after like 29 weeks because with monodi twins, you never know what's going to happen. People have them super early. So I was already pretty happy that I made it to almost 33 weeks. We get to the hospital and they put me in a room and they take my labs right away because your labs can tell you if you're having a preeclampsia, but I'm pretty sure you have protein in your urine, or excess protein in your urine, and there's like other signs in your labs that's showing that you're having preeclampsia, and another name for that is toxemia. Sure enough, they like showed signs of preeclampsia, and so they decided to keep me in, I think it's called a triage room. They decided to keep me in labor and delivery in that room for a few more hours just to monitor my vitals. And my blood pressure actually was improving, but my heart rate was not, and my labs were getting worse. So they kept me there. And eventually, after a few hours, I was just getting really uncomfortable. My headache was getting worse. It was pounding. and they decided to send me upstairs because they wanted to get me to 34 weeks. That's a really big milestone in pregnancy, and they said, if we can, we want to hold those babies in for at least one more week. You will have to be in the hospital this whole time in case anything goes awry. So plan on being in the hospital for a full week. I had already been on bed rest for the last few weeks before this, so I was just like so discouraged. I didn't want to have super little preemies, but at the same time, I'm like, I cannot suffer like this for a week. My head's pounding, my whole body is swollen, I feel like crap. It was no bueno. So they moved me upstairs. And by the time I got upstairs, it was kind of Sunday evening-ish. They put me in a room that was like a postpartum room. They just kept taking my vitals, and they put me on something called magnesium. Like, they put me on a mag drip, which is horrible. So basically, when you're having preeclampsia, you can have seizures and strokes. I think you get put on magnesium, so it avoids that from happening. And basically it makes you extremely hot, extremely uncomfortable, and you can't walk anymore because it makes you really, really dizzy and like feel super out of it. My headache continued, and by Sunday night I just was feeling like straight hot garbage. It was not good. And so they moved me back down into labor and delivery. So if any emergency happened and they had to hurry in, do a C-section or hurry and induce me, they could. So now that I'm back down in labor and delivery where the action's happening, it is Monday morning. I have not slept a wink, so they gave me a Benadryl so I could at least get a few hours of sleep, and that actually did knock me out. I slept for a few hours and I woke up, and when I woke up it was Monday afternoon, and my OBGYN came in and said, I don't feel good about letting you go to 34 weeks. Your labs keep getting worse, your blood pressure is getting worse, and your kidney function is getting worse. And she said that because I was no longer peeing very much, they're gonna put in a catheter so they can monitor that. And my vision at this point was like almost gone. It was awful, like it was super blurry. And my eyes were starting to kind of look like I had a stroke. Like one of my eyes I have a picture of me smiling, and like this side of my face is really droopy, but I think that's from the magnesium. I just started to get really swollen, really droopy, and my headaches were so bad. I had 3 ice packs like strapped to my head with like tied like a little bonnet underneath because it was just like, I just had ice all over my whole head, and it was wretched. So then after my doctor said she didn't want me to go to 34 weeks, we talked, and she told me, I want to schedule you for a C-section at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. So at this point, I'm feeling so hopeful because it was so miserable and my labs kept getting worse. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to get super dangerous preeclampsia mode. So me and my husband were relieved. We called family and said, hey, the boys are coming tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. All is well. My in-laws actually left to go to Boston because my sister-in-law had a baby 2 days before we did. And so my in-laws were gone, which really stunk because we're super close with them. So my doctor put me on the schedule for 7 a.m. the next morning. And I say my doctor, I actually didn't know this OBGYN. She was just the one on staff. But then, so my doctor said, your surgery's in the morning. You can eat until midnight. And I was so miserable, so tired, had gotten no sleep. She told me to take an Ambien, which ends up being really important to the story later on. So they bring me dinner. I haven't had anything to eat in the last like day and a half because they didn't know if I had to have a C-section at any point, so they weren't letting me eat. They brought me like Thanksgiving dinner. It was turkey and mashed potatoes and gravy and green beans. It was like straight up Thanksgiving. I chow it all down because I'm starving, and she gives me a full Ambien, which I have never taken. I have taken a fourth of an Ambien one time when I had really bad jet lag and I needed sleep, and that's all, and it knocked me out. So when they gave me a full one, I was pretty terrified. After I had taken the full Ambien and had eaten my full Thanksgiving dinner, they take my labs, and this is where the story gets crazy. Anesthesiologist and OBGYN come running into our room and basically said that my kidneys have fully stopped functioning. I am no longer peeing. I am starting to go into kidney failure, and that I'm having severe preeclampsia and I have to have a C-section right now. So Seth, my husband, calls my mom because I really wanted her there and said, the babies are coming right now, having an emergency C-section, get on over here. They hand him his scrubs, so he is somewhere off getting his scrubs on and getting cleaned up to go to the OR, and I don't even have time to like finish like swallowing my last bite of dinner, and the anesthesiologist was like, I am so sorry, you are going to be puking the whole C-section because you're not supposed to eat before surgery. He's like, we're gonna have a bunch of people there to help you so you don't aspirate during your surgery. And they're like, and you probably won't remember it because you just took an Ambien. And he actually almost didn't want to do the C-section because he was so worried about me throwing up and choking, because you are numb from here down completely, so you can't like make yourself throw up. He was very concerned, but my labs were enough to overpower the fact that I had just eaten a full meal, and we went into the OR. It wasn't as cold and like scary as I remember ORs being from surgeries that I've had before. I think it was due to the fact that there was like 20 people in there. There are a lot of people for twin C-sections in the room. From what I can remember, the Ambien had kicked in at this point, so it was I have very like hit and miss memories from my C-section, and the only reason I like know the full story is my husband telling it back to me. What I can remember from my C-section is they scooted me over onto the bed, and I got my spinal, which did not hurt at all. Like, I heard horror stories about epidurals and spinals, and I must have had like an amazing anesthesiologist, because I was like holding on to the nurse, like squeezing as hard as I could, because I was like so terrified. I was more terrified for that than a C-section. And he's like, it's done. And I'm like, are you serious? I didn't even feel like, I maybe felt the teeny tiniest little pinch. Like, my flu shot was worse than that. All of a sudden, my whole like body just started tingling. It was so weird. And by the time they had me lay back, I couldn't like put my legs up on the bed. They had to like pick my legs up and put them on the bed. It worked in seconds. I was completely numb, and it was so cool how they tested it. Is he just took like a little wet cloth and he started at my legs and drug it all the way up my body, and he's like, tell me when you can feel this. And finally at about like just above like my boob, I could feel it. So yeah, I knew that it had kicked in, and I wasn't nervous anymore because I literally could not feel it. I asked my anesthesiologist, I'm like, oh, have they started? And he's like, oh yeah, the babies are almost out. And I was like, okay, I haven't felt anything. And at this point, I still hadn't thrown up. I was actually feeling really good. My adrenaline was pumping, but I was also half asleep. So they finally got out baby A, which is Sawyer, and I heard him cry. They couldn't lift him up over the curtain at all to show me because he was so little. I heard someone say, happy birthday, like one of the nurses or something. It was like, happy birthday. They pulled him out and they tossed him through the window. Not tossed, but you know what I mean. So they caught him in the NICU. They're actually called like catchers. They caught him in the NICU and started all his vitals there. And then I think a minute later, they had out my baby B, who was my tiny baby, and they had him out. Someone said, happy birthday, and I heard this little cry, and then he was through the window. So once the babies had gone to the NICU, my husband actually said, hey, can I go in there and see them? And they said, sure, but you can't come back into the OR after, so make sure it's okay with your wife. So I told my husband, go check on the babies, make sure everything's okay. So he left at this point, and I just was talking there with the anesthesiologist while they were sewing me up. And it was very weird because they were sewing me up and they got to a layer, and the anesthesiologist said, you've been doing great so far, you haven't choked, you haven't thrown up. Once we start sewing this layer together, you will get sick. There's something about the nerves, like the nerve endings, it makes people throw up. And I was like, oh no, I'm not nauseous at all. And all of a sudden I feel the tugging, and then I'm just like, ugh, I started throwing up. And it was the weirdest sensation of my life. I threw up every single day in my pregnancy, and so I was like, oh, I'll be fine. Like, I'm so used to this. You have no muscular control because you are numb. So basically all I had to do was turn my head to the side, and the nurses had to like hold my head a certain way. And I just went like, I just opened my mouth and it was just like coming out, and I was choking and coughing, and they had to like get it out of my mouth. I feel so bad for those nurses. It was awful, but I only threw up a couple times and then I was done. After I was done, they took me back to my recovery room, which was my room in labor and delivery. And my mom was there and my two brother-in-laws were there. to support my husband, and since his parents were gone, mom and my 2 brother-in-laws were able to go see the boys in the NICU before me, which actually didn't bother me. I just knew that I couldn't. I was still in recovery. I was still under monitoring, and they were already there. So I was like, go look at them, take pictures, come and show me. Came back and showed me pictures. I was surprised how much they looked like normal babies for being born 2 months early. They were very wrinkly, very small, but they still like looked like little babies. They weren't I'm not gonna say that they were cute little babies, because preemies, especially that little of a preemie, they're not really cute. They're just wrinkly. They look like little grandpas. My babies are much cuter now, and they were much cuter once they got closer to their due date. I think the bigger they got, the cuter they got. So baby A is Sawyer Anthony Jensen, and he was 3 pounds, 12 ounces. He was my big boy. He was on a CPAP, which is like a machine to help open up your lungs. So he had this mask on his face. We never really got to see his face until a few days after he was born, because he was on that. But Isaac, this is what's amazing, is Isaac Porter Jensen, my baby B, my little boy, he was 3 pounds, and he didn't need any oxygen support at all. Like, he just was born, his lungs were fine, like, he just was doing awesome on his own. I got to see Isaac's little face, and he was so wrinkly, and they had really dark hair, which is weird because Seth and I were both bald babies, and my boys are bald now. They wheeled me in there, I want to say after like an hour or 2 of recovering from my C-section. They were both in isolates, so I just got to kind of stick my hand in there and like see Isaac and interact with him. I didn't get very close to Sawyer. They kind of wheeled me over, and I could like look over into his little bed, but I didn't get to touch him. And I actually didn't get to hold him for a few days either, because he just like, with his CPAP and everything, he just like wasn't stable. That night I was actually already feeling so much better, but I had to stay on the magnesium for I think like 12 more hours. As soon as they were born, like my labs were fine. It was very weird. But once they were born, I didn't get to hold Isaac until the next day. He was just so tiny. He was only 3 pounds, and he was like, it was like holding a little burrito on your chest, and it was scary. Like, they were just so fragile, and like the way the NICU nurses hold them, they're like, it's like nothing to them, but to me I was like, ah. I don't think I got to hold Sawyer for like 3 or 4 days, because it was easy. The recovery was easier for me than I expected, and it was so smooth. They got him out healthy and safe. Postpartum wise is a whole nother journey, whole nother thing, and C-section postpartum like comes with its own difficulties. I was in the hospital for 5 days. I was itching to get home so badly. That is my birth story. If you like this and you want to follow my journey with my beautiful little boys and our growing family, please subscribe and like. I would love your support. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.